Hello, and welcome to another Ouchies Batrep. Today I face my mortal coil in more ways than one. Wait, what? Group W is in their final act startside and have begun raiding parts stores in the fringe areas. Comstar is to intercept and defeat these bandits. In addition, a band of nobles upset at the marauding mercenaries have offered to link up and support their remaining possessions. Comstar is eschewing the infantry formations for a more mobile response unit. An element of PO tanks have been drafted into the defenses from the local militias to make up the shortfall. The nobles contain a fairly eclectic variety of mechs. The vast majority of them are aimed towards anti-militia work, what with lots of plasma rifles and SRMs, including a really expensive showpiece. And on the Group W side of things is, oh my gosh, that's not a bandit force. It's an assault company. Setup was a little different this time, with the goal of crushing each other in a straight-up fight. In this variation, one lance was allowed the ability to come on a flank, provided they rolled under the slowest walking speed of the unit. Otherwise, they would enter a turn later. Group W deploys their cavalry lance on the north end, while we deploy our lance on the southern end, trying to take advantage of the fact that they deployed their other lance really close to the board edge, thus, securing us early contact with him and forcing the rest of his units, who are spread well across the board, to react in kind. This is actually already well in favor of Comstar, since the cavalry lance actually outweighs the lance that walked onto the board traditionally by quite a bit. When it comes to tactical maneuvering, it's pretty important to dictate the pace at which you move, and getting in your opponent's face is usually a pretty easy way to do it. It's always good to get a feel for the tempo of a game like this, because being able to know when and where to apply a lot of firepower is absolutely critical in most of these war games, and Battletech certainly is no exception. The Comstar assault tanks begin moving up the center, trying to get towards the terrain features in the center of the board so that it might be able to provide them a little bit of cover or reduce some of the avenues of fire, while the other lance that is now engaging the Comstar cavalry lance begins reeling towards the assault lance in order to help cover their escape vector and not have to fight the lance all by themselves. The nobles, however, start tangling with the cavalry lance from Group W as well along the northern edge of the board. Shots are traded early, and it's starting to get really ugly for them, even though it's only the second turn of the game. Their anti-vehicle bias, what with their plasma rifles and crit seekers, isn't really paying them any dividends right now that their targets are primarily mechs. First kill. I jest, he keeps breaking his actuators, even in the last game. The nobles are engaging the cavalry lance from Group W, while the Comstar cavalry lance is trying to persecute their advantage as much as possible, because they're not going to get an opportunity like this again anytime soon. I mean, it's all back shots. It should be pretty straightforward, right? All the while, the tanks are rumbling up the hill. Will they have enough time, or will they be forced to shoot out in the open? I start experiencing a fairly crushing headache, which I ignore as best I can, but nonetheless, Comstar assault tanks continue to push towards the depot, while the cavalry lance stands to reconsider their moves, considering they would be gun-to-gun with the Group W assault lance in the next turn, and be heavily outgunned forward if they choose to keep moving the way they are. Comstar is still trying to rely on the assault tanks being able to hold the center and shore up the difference in weight of arms along the center of the map. However, it's becoming quite clear that it is a unit versus unit combat, and Group W has regained their tactical footing. The nobles, however, are going toe-to-toe with Group W, and it is absolutely ugly up there in the forest behind the depot. Cicada managed to get real dicey and go right for the back area of the whole lance. only one mech can get a shot off at him, a Banshee, just because his arc was just barely in range. It was a fairly brilliant maneuver. Even so, shots are being traded all across the board from the assault tanks into the respective assault lance that's coming down into the depot, and the Nightwolf and Legacy getting cozy behind the hill, placing shots downrange quite effectively. The C3 actually pays dividends in this game as well, lending the Legacy something like a 5 or 6 plus on nearly all of his shots. You gotta love that. Here you can see the Cicada managed to find a blind spot in that formation, but it didn't miss the attention of the challengers, who managed to whiff most of their shots at him. At this point, I'm reassessing the situation, what with the assault mix coming down the range, and I go ahead and throw the brakes on the assault tanks. They're in a nice juicy position, and even if they get immobilized here, they have a lot of targets to shoot at, or controlling the center ground. It seems like a great idea in concept. Nonetheless, they start firing down against the assault mechs that are about to come down their way. It's either kill them or be killed. The Group W southern element manages to scatter to some degree under the effective weight of the Nightwolf and the Legacy. They really are tearing up those mechs, but it's not effective fire, so to speak, because it's being splashed over every mech out there. It's generally picking the lowest to-hit number and then just concentrating fire on it for an easy kill. But it's still doing a lot of damage to the whole lance. And the first kill of the game goes to Crew 64 and the Challenger, who manages to score another decisive blow into the back torso of the Cicada. Of course, it's really not saying much, it's the back of a light mech, but it managed to core it all out in one turn. Something should be said of it though. The Challengers are whiffing their shots on the light mechs when their intended role to tackle the assaults in the center is completely being missed. All the while, the nobles are trading bloody nose for bloody nose as the assaults are just walking down the center unimpeded by the light fire they're taking from the little Poe tanks. And Group W's southern vanguard is successfully tying up Comstar's cavalry in the south. It's starting to look a little tentative. And if things were iffy, it just got worse. The Poe up in the front just went boom as it finds the hazards of high-velocity shells mingling with the ammo. The second militia tank begins to reconsider staring down the awesome, leading the Group W's steady charge. But all is not lost. Comstar successfully fells the Orion under a weight of fire from almost the Legacy completely on itself, taking off the entire right torso in the process. It's enough to immediately place the mech into forced withdrawal. The tactics are painful for Comstar this turn, but with the Legacy and Nightwolf forcing a fight of attrition on the southern flank, they are starting to see a real dividend to not having to face concerted resistance from the rest of Group W. However, it is to some consternation to the nobles that they are holding the northern pass by the very skin of their teeth. Comstar cavalry mechs begin scattering through the Group W lines in an attempt to cast the C3 net as far as possible and pick off any weakened targets should the opportunity provide itself. The nobles, however, tactically check Group W and force them to head around the hill in order to get to the side shots of those tanks. Now, I'm not without my faults. I was at this point completely crushed by the headache that I was ignoring. It was pretty bad, and on a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 3+ Smurf save in Golden Jello. My mind was fried. Dream logic was starting to be as coherent as anything else, and it wouldn't go away for anything. Considering what would have caused it in the first place, I can only think that it must have been the Indian food I had prior. It was tasty, I guess, but it was old, reheated Indian food that I had for lunch. I began to fear the worst, and that it might actually be something I had to consider calling the game on because I was starting to feel legitimately ill. I soldiered on regardless. Static fire in earnest starts trading between the assault lance and the Challenger tanks as they go toe-to-toe, showing their true might against each other, and a whole heap of damage is starting to be traded, and if bad could go worse, one of the Challengers doesn't make the trade very well and takes a crit right to the Gauss rifle. This is actually fairly devastating for Comstar because now their center line is fairly fractured with a whole assault lance that's about to come crashing through the parking lot with very little to stop it. Comstar's cavalry lance actually begins working over some of the lances that are nearby them and managed to send 5 golden BBs right into the ammo bins of the riflemen in front of them. That's really gotta hurt. But the carnage is starting to stack up all over the field, but tactically it's really starting to look like Group W not only regained their tactical footing, but are starting to regain the initiative altogether. Now, at this point the headache was completely pounding. I could barely be coherent in the game at all, but I really wanted to see this game through. It is so close. We are at the wire. We are tactically exposed, but yet the game could go either way. We just need a few more turns. And just as much, the Comstar tank lance begins pulling back, as is prudent. It needs to get those Gauss rifles into a nice bracket without having to deal with the cavalry lance on the hill trying to move into their side. But nonetheless, the nobles actually block them off at the pass. It's fairly brilliant, and they start going muzzle to muzzle in the most epic Rock'em Sock'em Robots kind of way. Group W calls the grudge match from the assault lance and begins singling out Tank 64 for its kills in the past games. Don't want another stray headshot from the first round in the next game, I suppose. I really can't say I blame him. It's one of those gamer superstitions like stacked dice. But I love that tank, and he's going to be coming to every field until, the crew eventually dies. The Raijin actually discovers that the Atlas has a suitable amount of weapons facing out the rear. There's a reason it was holding up the rear of the formation. But since it's pretty much untouched, the Raijin got out scot-clean. And the Rax Centurion that decided to get a little dicey with the Legacy manages to turn around with the Nightwolf and fill it full of shells. But the pilot doesn't survive that one. And here we are at the end of turn 6, what with the carnage accumulating all across the center. Even a bushwhacker falls down and is brutally savaged and very likely to die in the next turn. What with Group W still having a great deal of momentum up the center, it was decided that they were tactically still a little vulnerable since the nobles were doing fairly well. They were going to mop up the mediums, and the other Comstar mech lance was pretty much okay. So we're going to rematch it. We're going to do it again a couple weeks from now. So the game didn't end, and we're going to rematch it. It's no longer a best of 3, now the best of 3. There's another best of 4? I don't know what you would call it at that point. It wasn't really a matter of time, even though we did get to 6 turns. We could have played a little bit longer had other situations permitted, but I was about to die. I felt really bad by turn 6, and I couldn't really keep my stuff together. I eventually did figure out what caused the headache, and it seems obvious in retrospect, but I hadn't really eaten much in the past couple of days. It's been really busy, and that's not really an excuse, but I recall that the biggest single calorie intake I had the day before was a Coke. I mean, it was just little bits here and there. I mean, it just pays that you should sit down and actually eat a good meal every now and then, but c'est la vie, what can you do? I should have just went across the street and got myself an apple at the corner store. Now, what went right? I really think moving the cavalry lance in and engaging Group W real early on and close was probably the smartest move we made the entire game. But Group W just played a really good game. This Cicada, for example, is an incredibly good move because he got into a blind spot of the entire lance. It forced the entire lance to either choose shooting at what was a better target in their front arc or protecting their rear and using fewer weapons. Bravo. But it's not without our own fairly decent maneuvers. The Hunchback from the Noble group actually did quite well, and he lived to tell the tale. But what we did horribly wrong, aside from not eating well, is expecting too much from those Challenger tanks. I mean, it's easy to forget that they're tanks, even though they weigh pretty high and they can deal damage like an assault. The crits are way, way more more dangerous for a tank than it'll ever be for a mech. And that's been an Ouchies Batrep. And thanks for watching. I really enjoy making these. I get better all the time. Sorry if the audio quality spots in and out and the quality of the video in general kind of changes a little. Being mentally crippled during filming actually has an effect on my camera focusing skills apparently.